David Blunkett row. The head of Westminster's standards watchdog says there's no doubt Mr. Blunkett has broken the rules.
Yes, it's clear that in not seeking the advice of the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, he did breach the Ministerial Code of Conduct. And
we'll bring you all the latest from Westminster. The other headlines on BBC News 24 at 10 o'clock. Remembering the victims of the London bombings, the Queen and Tony Blair will join relatives and survivors in a special service. Energy ministers from 20 countries discuss how technology can be harnessed to curb climate change.
Still ahead this hour on BBC News 24, a sledgehammer blow to drug traffickers. The Navy seizes 2 tons of cocaine in the Caribbean. The new style park rangers who'll stop our parks becoming no-go areas. Stop our open space.
Hello, very good morning. The Work and Pensions Secretary David Blunkett is coming under further pressure over his business links. He's agreed to sell his shares in a biotechnology company where he briefly served as a director before returning to the Cabinet. But the Conservatives say it's not enough and are demanding a full inquiry. This morning, the chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life told the BBC that Mr. Blunkett had undoubtedly breached the Ministerial Code of Conduct.
Morning. I'm not doing interviews on the street, thank you very much. Excuse me.
But that won't put a stop to the questions about David Blunkett's business interests. The Work and Pensions Secretary says his family will sell its shares in a DNA testing firm. But now it appears the minister ignored reminders that he needed to take advice from a special committee before working in the private sector.
Ministerial Code's very clear on this matter. It says you should refer it to the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. For me, the word should means you should do it.
In these letters released last night, the head of the Civil Service, Sir Gus O'Donnell, confirmed that David Blunkett should have told the committee about his appointment as director of the DNA company, but said he didn't have to take its advice. The Conservatives want a full inquiry and say the minister is damaged goods.
Well, the fundamental question is he still an asset to the government or has he become a liability? Because his job is actually running the Child Support Agency, which is in crisis. It's dealing with the pensions problems, which are enormous. Instead, we have the whole of his time dominated by his personal circumstances, his personal indiscretions in some cases, and poor judgment. And the country deserves better.
Friends of David Blunkett say the matter is closed, but the minister is finding it hard to walk away from the row and the questions from his political opponents. Sean Curran, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, our chief political correspondent James Landale is outside the Department for Work and Pensions. James, the Prime Minister says the issue's closed. It's far from it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's clearly not the case. There are still lots of outstanding questions, and in the last few minutes, the Liberal Democrats have just written to the Prime Minister with a long list of 6 questions they say need to be answered and answered soon. Why did David Blunkett get this job in the first place when there was a wide expectation he'd get back into government? Why did he not make this check with the Business Committee that on getting the appointment in the first place? How much was he paid? He's refused to say that so far. Has he met the owners of DNA Bioscience recently, and if so, in what way? Did he take any advice on whether it was okay to put the shares, which he's announced he's going to sell, in a trust for his 3 sons? What advice did he get on that? So the questions keep coming.
Will the answers be forthcoming?
No, I don't think so. Not in the immediate term. We're being told that David Blunkett is certainly not going to be doing any interviews today. I mean, I think the thing about this is how this story develops. And what do we know today that we didn't know yesterday? Well, we know, for example, that on the question of did David Blunkett breach the Code of Conduct by failing to consult this advisory committee, yes, we do know he did break the rules on that. Why? Well, it's in black and white from the Cabinet Secretary, who says, look, you should. Ministers are obliged. It's compulsory. No option whatsoever. You have to consult the committee. The voluntary side of it is saying, well, do you take all the advice or not? That clearly shows there was a breach, and it has been backed up, as you said earlier, by Alistair Graham, the chairman of the Standards and Privileges Committee here at Westminster. The second thing that we know this morning that we didn't know yesterday is that David Blunkett had previously ignored the rules on a previous occasion. We have 3 letters from Lord Mayhew, the peer, the Lord who sits at the top of this independent business advisory committee, basically sending 3 letters to David Blunkett about an earlier business appointment, nothing to do with DNA Bioscience. in which he said, look, you've got this job, but you haven't consulted us. The rules say you probably should. So in other words, more evidence of David Blunkett ignoring these rules.
OK, so given all of that, and given, quite frankly, the lacklustre response of the Prime Minister yesterday coming out in support of David Blunkett, is there a sense that the rug will be pulled from beneath David Blunkett?
We don't know that for definite yet at all. My sense is that it'll need a little bit more. We'll need more revelations before this becomes terminal for David Blunkett's career. But certainly his career is in doubt. That is certain. The key question now is, does the government, do his colleagues rally round? At the moment there's been an echoing silence on the airwaves in public. Ministers have not been coming out and giving them his full support. And that is a key gap. Now the question is, does the government act to do that? Does the Prime Minister say something? Does he rally round to say, look, this is my minister, he's got a big job of work in terms of reforming incapacity benefit, reforming pensions? Or does the Prime Minister say, look, those two pieces of legislation, the big legacy issues as we described them here at Westminster, in other words, the stuff Tony Blair wants to get right before he leaves Downing Street, does he say, look, the risk is now too great? David Blunkett, the questions surrounding his judgment are simply too great. If that happens, then Blunkett's out. But that we're not at that stage yet. We have no evidence of that whatsoever. Because bottom line is this, David Blunkett's job is in the gift of the Prime Minister. It's that he is the man who has to lose the confidence in the Minister. And at the moment, at least in public, Tony Blair is saying that he has confidence in David Blunkett and that the selling of his shares are an end to the matter.
All right, James, thank you very much indeed. James Landau there. Simon.
The Queen and the Prime Minister will attend a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral this afternoon for the victims of the London bombings in July. 52 people were killed and 700 wounded when suicide bombers attacked underground trains and a bus.
52 people were killed, hundreds more were injured. "22-year-old Kieran Cassidy was on the tube from King's Cross when the bomb went off.
I do find it very, very difficult, especially the way he died, really. I mean, blew into bits on a tube train. It's not a very nice way to die, especially when his only crime was going to work.
The victims' relatives will be joined in the cathedral by survivors. All the major faiths will play a part. The message is not only of remembrance, but of unity.
It's a very important aspect of the service that towards the end there is a more of an atmosphere perhaps of hope, and that we won't let these kinds of acts of violence divide us.
There is, however, a sense of anger amongst some of those most deeply affected. Kieran's father feels that as a relative his concerns have never been a priority, and he isn't convinced the memorial service will help him.
Well, maybe it's a good thing, but really the government could have come to us a little bit earlier. Like this is the first time we have had sort of contact. Well, I had contact last week with Tessa Joel. But I mean, the government were having contact with the Muslim community within 24 hours of the bombs going off. Why didn't they come and see some of us, really? We were the ones that were suffering.
So many lives continue to be affected by the events of July 7th. It's hoped this memorial service will provide a chance for us all to reflect and remember. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
Well, let's cross to St Paul's now. Our special correspondent Philippa Thomas is there. Philippa, what sort of form will this service take?
Well, it's very much an act of remembrance. It's about paying respect to those who died, and it's also to thank those who got to the scene, the firefighters, the paramedics, the ambulance staff, to thank them for the role they played so promptly and so professionally. Now with us is the man who'll be leading the service, the Dean of St Paul's, the Very Reverend John Moses. Now Dean, for you, what are the themes? How are you structuring the service?
There are two key words. The first is remembrance and the second is hope. Remembrance because we are partly mourning those who were killed in those 4 terrorist attacks. But alongside their families, there will be those who were injured, their families and friends, and many people, if I may, who were deeply traumatised: London transport staff, emergency services, doctors and nurses at London hospitals. So looking back, if you like, and 3-4 months after the event is not a bad time. You still grieve, nobody ever forgets, but it may just be that this service will help some people to take one step forward. But secondly, hope. because this service is also about tomorrow. It's about what sort of city London is. It's about what sort of country we are. So I hope this service is also partly an affirmation of the values in which we believe as British people, about our sense of tolerance, and about our refusal to be beaten by a very, very small handful of people who represent nobody apart from their own prejudice and bigotry.
It's a Christian service. How are you reaching out to those of other faiths?
It's a Christian service because St Paul's is a Christian cathedral. But one of the things that you soon discover about St Paul's is that it's big enough to embrace everybody. And there will be large numbers of people here today who are Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Buddhists, Sikhs. And there is in fact one point in the service when the leaders of those other world faiths stand with the Bishop of London, make their act of commitment for the future, and representatives of those different traditions light a candle of hope. So the multi-faith dimension is important, although I think it's also important in this country that a service at St Paul's remains basically a Christian act of worship.
You talked about the emotions that people will be feeling, of course, and many of the people here, families who are bereaved, some of the survivors, have maybe talked to each other on the phone or emailed. They may be meeting face to face here for the first time.
I think they will. I think there'll be a lot of raw emotion. There'll be a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, and these things will not go away. I'm a London boy, and Londoners are quite stubborn. You know, we will not be beaten, and we have to live with this awful thing, and we have to do it in a fairly hard-headed way. But let's be quite clear that for the families, the victims, and some of those who were injured, and some of those who were caught up in the work of rescue and rehabilitation, this is going to be a very painful afternoon. I actually think that that can also be part of the healing process. And yes, as you right to say, many of them, particularly after the service, will be meeting each other for the first time. There's been a website, as you know. A lot of words have been exchanged. Don't underestimate for a moment the power of a service like this in this cathedral to begin the work of healing.
They were London bombings, but it's a national tragedy, and I suppose you'll be very aware of speaking to the nation as you conduct the service, a nation that was shocked because this was the first attack of its kind.
Yes, it was. I think I want to say there's an international dimension as well. Terrorism is not a national phenomenon, it's an international phenomenon, and so far as we can tell, we will have to live with this for the foreseeable future. But you can't be at St Paul's and forget the national dimension. You know, people have called it the parish church of the nation in the past. We're also very much the Londoners' church. And all these things, it's about the integrity of this city, it's about our values and our sense of tolerance and fair play as a nation, which I hope will be at the fore.
Well, thank you very much for coming to speak to us on News 24, the Dean of St Paul's, the Very Reverend John Moses. And just to say that the service will be covered in full in a special programme on BBC One at 2:40 this afternoon, beginning at 2:40 this afternoon. And here on News 24 within the hour, we'll be talking to a firefighter, a woman who was one of the first on the scene at Aldgate Tube Station on the 7th of July. For now, back to you.
Philippa Thomas, thank you.
Now at 10:13, some police officers are ill-equipped to combat crime. That's according to a report by a right-wing think tank called Policia. The study says entrance requirements are not tough enough and the brightest and best move on to careers elsewhere, but the Home Office says it will consider the recommendations.
Britain's biggest airport operator, BAA, is to cut 700 jobs. The firm said its profits have fallen by nearly £200 million. Much of the drop came from lower takings in airport shops at Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted. The company's chief executive, Mike Clasper, said he's reshaping the company.
The government's plans for the future of the BBC have been criticised as misguided and unworkable by a House of Lords committee. The peers say the proposals will do nothing to reduce the corporation's vulnerability to political pressure. They also attack the BBC's request for an above-inflation increase in the licence fee.
2 tons of cocaine with a street value of £200 million have been seized by a Royal Navy warship on patrol in the Caribbean. The Defence Secretary John Reid has paid tribute to the ship's crew, describing the operation as a sledgehammer blow to drug traffickers. Colin Campbell reports.
Captured red-handed by the Royal Navy, it was a high-seas chase with a dramatic end. HMS Cumberland intercepted the drug smugglers 100 miles off the coast of Nicaragua. Despite repeat warnings, the gang in the high-powered speedboat refused to stop. It was only when they started nearing land when naval officers decided to bring the chase to an abrupt end, ordering snipers inside a pursuing helicopter to take out the boat's engines.
By using non-lethal disabling fire, such as warning shots from machine gun and, in the event, sniper fire to fire at his engines, we stopped the smuggler, and HMS Cumberland closed it. I put boats in the water and we arrested the crew and took charge of the contraband.
This is the contraband, 2 tons of cocaine, stored in plastic bags amongst the drums of fuel needed to power the boat. It has an estimated street value of £200 million. HMS Cumberland was sent to the Caribbean to provide disaster relief during the hurricane season, at the same time crack down on drug smuggling gangs in the region. The Defence Secretary John Reid has paid tribute to the crew of the frigate, whose actions, he says, have dealt a sledgehammer blow to the drug traffickers. Colin Campbell, BBC News.
You are watching BBC News 24. Still ahead, park life. We're on patrol with the American wardens, showing us how to transform our green spaces.
The headlines this morning: David Blunkett, the head of the Committee on MP Standards, says he did breach the ministerial code over his DNA directorship.
The victims of the London bombings will be remembered today in a service at St Paul's Cathedral.
Energy ministers from 20 countries meet in London to discuss curbing climate change through technology.
Hearts Football Club, after resigning from the side, the former chairman Lord Fowkes has called the majority shareholder Vladimir Romanov a dictator who could face a revolution. Flanker Martin Williams will miss Wales's autumn test opener against New Zealand next Saturday after the death of his mother. And Makaidi Diva has made history this morning with an unprecedented 3rd victory in the Melbourne Cup, Australia's most famous race. More on that at 10:45. See you then.
Let's take a look then at some of the main live events coming up here on News 24 today. The memorial service for the victims of the London terrorist attacks is being held at 3 o'clock in St Paul's Cathedral.
Environment ministers from around the world are meeting in London this morning. There'll be a news briefing from Patricia Hewitt. That's at 11:15.
And Prince Charles and Camilla make their first official appearance together in the United States. They arrive in New York early this evening.
Well, more now on our main story. The Work and Pension Secretary David Blunkett coming under increasing political pressure over his business links despite selling his shares in the firm at the heart of the controversy. Let's go live now to Westminster, talk to the Liberal Democrats Work and Pension spokesman David Blunkett. Good morning to you. Should he go?
I think that he's used 8 of his 9 political lives, and I think what we know this morning is that his statement yesterday, which he hoped would draw a line under this, has failed to do so. Overnight we've had the information out that he should actually have checked before becoming a director of the DNA company. We have a very bizarre set of circumstances. He has to explain, I think, why he decided right in the middle of a general election campaign to take on this directorship 2 weeks before a cabinet reshuffle, and then decided to keep these shares in what looks like a clear conflict of interest that he acknowledged yesterday. So he's not drawn a line under this. He really ought to be making a personal statement today to the House of Commons to explain his position, and if he doesn't do that, our view is that there should be an inquiry into his conduct.
So Alistair Graham says there is no doubt whatsoever that he breached the ministerial code. Isn't that enough?
I think that for most people it will depend upon whether that was a technical breach or whether it shows an intent to actually deliberately breach the rules. And I think initially that many people, when they first heard this story come out, thought that this was a technical breach by somebody who wasn't a cabinet minister. Now that we've got all the information out, we can see the rather bizarre set of circumstances that led to us being where we are, including him ignoring previous advice that he should actually be checking on this before becoming a director, the fact that he became a director right in the middle of the general election campaign, which is bizarre in the extreme, and then the ownership of these shares being transferred to members of the family rather than being sold. And all of this creates a far more worrying impression that what he was actually trying to do was cut corners in order to make a financial gain. And if that turns out to be what's at the bottom of this, then his position will become untenable.
Isn't the problem here that any government minister should be an asset rather than a liability, not just to his party, but obviously to the country? And when that line becomes blurred, then things have to happen.
Well, I think you're right that, David Blunkett always used to have the reputation as being a hyperactive minister who at the Home Office and Education was constantly making announcements. David Blunkett, since he's been the spokesman for work and pensions, hasn't made a single statement to the House of Commons on any issue. He hasn't taken policy forward in any area, such as pensions or the Child Support Agency. All of his time has been spent dealing with these personal allegations, and I think that if he can't answer these questions in the near future, then the Prime Minister will conclude that he has become more of a liability to the government than an asset.
David Laws, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, a two-day meeting of energy and environment ministers from 20 nations opens in London today. The focus will be on curbing climate change through technology rather than binding international agreements. But they're also considering ways of helping developing nations to curb greenhouse gas emissions without damaging economic growth. Well, I'm joined now from Billingham by the Managing Director of Biofuels Corporation, Sean Sutcliffe, and he's building one of Europe's biggest biodiesel plants, producing biodiesel using a combination of rapeseed and soya bean oil. It all sounds a bit complicated, but it could be that your technology does help to curb climate change. Can you explain how?
Yes, absolutely. What you can see in the background is one of Europe's largest biodiesel plants. And all that is a fuel made from vegetable oils, which is a renewable source, which can just be used in a standard diesel engine. So the plant that we're building now is about 1% of UK's requirements for diesel. So that's a very real contribution that we can make here and now.
Is it? I mean, it doesn't sound an awful lot.
Well, if you think about the targets that the EU have set, which is 5.75% of all fuels coming from renewable sources by the end of the decade, that's 1 million tonnes of carbon dioxide saved, which would otherwise be going into the atmosphere. So it's a pretty significant contribution that we can make. And what I would say is this is the first of many plants that us and other people could build in the UK.
How much support do you get from the government?
Well, at the moment, the duty paid on renewable fuels is a little bit less than that paid on mineral diesel, because obviously it's not contributing to carbon costs. But we do hope that the government will introduce a new measure, really mandating renewable fuel up to the 5% level in 2008. So that's another step that can be taken in the UK, which actually mirrors steps that have been taken in Germany and France, for example, to ensure that they meet their targets.
Yes, so what would you like to hear coming out of this meeting over the next few days?
Well, what we'd like to hear is that the government absolutely will press ahead with the fuel obligation, which will set those targets, put it into law, and allow us to get on and make the investment in further plants after the first one. From the point of view of the public, actually we're not asking for any change, because what will happen is the biodiesel, the renewable diesel, will be blended in at 5% with their standard diesel. So they just need to go to the forecourts as they do now with the same cars and fill up their diesel engines with this blend. So that's one of the real beauties of this. It doesn't require huge investments from the public.
OK, Sean, thank you very much indeed. Sean Sutcliffe there.
There's been another night of rioting in Paris. The French Interior Minister has promised to step up security using intelligence agents to seek out troublemakers. The violence has now spread beyond the area of Clichy-sous-Bois, which has seen the worst of the disturbances. It was triggered by the deaths of 2 teenagers. Andrew Burrows reports.
11 cars were set on fire by rioting youths during a 5th night of disturbances in the northern suburbs of Paris. Police arrested 12 young men after firing tear gas to disperse a crowd of 100 youths involved in an angry standoff with 50 officers close to a mosque. The city's northern suburbs include many run-down, high-rise estates housing largely Muslim immigrants, predominantly young people, as many as a quarter of whom are unemployed. The trouble was sparked by the deaths of 2 teenagers who were accidentally electrocuted after climbing into an electricity substation, amid allegations that the boys were being chased by police at the time. Early this morning, a police garage was set alight. Local anger has been fueled by earlier accusations that a police tear gas canister hit a local mosque, which a brother of one of the electrocution victims has described as disrespectful. The trouble in the Paris suburbs, long recognised as a time bomb of unrest waiting to explode, is a challenge for Interior Minister Nicolas Sarkozy, who's widely seen as President Chirac's likely successor. Asked about the tear gas hitting a mosque, he said it was a police-type canister, but wasn't necessarily fired by the police. Mr. Sarkozy has promised to wage a war without mercy on crime in the suburbs. French police have spoken of some outbreaks of copycat violence in other northern suburbs of Paris, with some cars set on fire, but say it was only carried out by small groups of 10 to 15 youths. Andrew Burrows, BBC News.
10:25. Now, the UN Security Council has increased pressure on Syria over the murder of the former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. In a unanimous resolution on the Council, the Council said failure to cooperate with the inquiry into his death could result in possible further action. Syria will be required to detain anyone UN inspectors believe to be a suspect. The Syrian Foreign Minister said there was no evidence of Syria's involvement in the killing.
The opposition in the semi-autonomous Tanzanian island of Zanzibar are claiming victory in its presidential elections. The poll has been marred by violence and allegations of vote rigging. But the head of the Civic United Front, Saif Sharif Hamad, said he'd won nearly 51% of the vote, just under 1% ahead of the ruling party candidate.
The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will be in the United States today for their first official overseas tour. I'll go first to New York to see Ground Zero and open memorial gardens for British victims of the September the 11th bombings.
Now, Britain has long been famed for its scenic parks, but we now face some tough talking from our American cousins. A team of New York park rangers is touring England to help local authorities build a skilled park force.
They say rangers can help turn neglected parks into successful, vibrant spaces within the community. Their first stop is Birmingham's Handsworth Park, as Rajesh Merchandani reports.
Autumn leaves keep a park ranger busy, but his work is more than just clearing up. Mohammed Yaqub says he's a symbol of reassurance for park visitors.
All the work is done like park is tidy. The people feel safer because the more people about in the park, like they know if they got the problem with, they can come to.
Handsworth Park is an inner-city oasis close to the scene of the recent troubles in Birmingham. Its green spaces were a no-go area until regeneration began, including hiring more park keepers.
You know, when it finished, I know it's going to look good, real good.
A place where you'd let your kids come and play?
Yes. And our kids will be safer here.
A campaign's underway for rangers in every urban park in the country, but on their own, more staff may not be enough.
It's going to be the new base for the park ranger once the park is completed, and also a classroom in the park facility.
And that's very important, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, yes.
The park's getting an £8 million facelift to modernise and widen its appeal. Similar schemes in America led to less crime and more visitors.
When you have a facility like this, it does bring all the different communities together. It is widely used, the park is widely used, even now while we're doing the work.
Many believe park rangers are vital for successful regeneration, helping provide a safe and pleasant environment. But the basic idea is even more simple. Where the diggers lead, the visitors should follow.
Rajesh Merchandani. The man with overall responsibility for the investigations into the London bombings has just been speaking about the detention of terror suspects in the UK. Assistant Commissioner Andy Hayman reiterated why the police want terror suspects to be held for 90 days. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Ty was at the briefing and is in Westminster. What's exactly been saying?
Well, he's been reiterating the very firmly put Metropolitan Police line, which is that they support the government in this aspect of the new terror bill, which reaches the committee stage tomorrow, in that they want the period of detention without charge extended from the current 14 days to 90 days. And Mr. Hayman has been saying, as he's already said before, that as far as the police are concerned, the complexity now of the terrorist threat with its international dimensions, with the reliance quite often upon pretty much high-tech, sophisticated computer software, means that the police need to be able to hold people for longer than the current position, which, as I say, is 2 weeks.
Any indication as to where we stand on any current terror threat?
No, that really wasn't what he was talking about today. The police are denying that they're taking a political role, but they certainly are lobbying in one sense of that word, and very much that is what this briefing was concentrated on. Mr. Heyman explained, as far as he's concerned, he doesn't want to get, he says, involved in the politics of it, but nevertheless, from an operational viewpoint, he maintains that the Metropolitan Police think that the whole scale of the terrorist threat has changed. So not talking about specific threats, but saying the kind of terrorist threat which the police have to confront is now so much more complex. And he gave an example that in one particular operation, disks have been removed from computers, which, if they were printed out, would create a pile of papers 66 feet high. He says that his detectives have to go through all of that before they can work out whether or not they have enough evidence to charge a terrorist suspect. 14 days, he says, isn't long enough for that.
Andy Ty, thank you.
It is 10:30. You're watching BBC News 24. Still ahead then. Living in a box, we'll be looking at the new Des Res that is just 9 feet square.
We'll have all the pictures from there. Let's bring you some rather dramatic pictures that we're getting from the Galapagos Islands, where a volcano has erupted.
Yes, it's been attracting hundreds of tourists to that largest of the Galapagos Islands, just less than a week after the volcano started to erupt. And the visits, a number of tourists have actually been restricted after roughly 200 people visited the island of Isabella each day last week. It's the mile-high Sierra Negra volcano. It began erupting, of course, October the 22nd, but the unique flora and fauna there, including, of course, the famed Galapagos tortoises, they have been unharmed.
Well, the Galapagos Islands were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979 for their exotic wildlife, such as we know as the marine iguanas and the blue-footed boobies.
Indeed. So the rich biodiversity there, which of course inspired Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, but fascinating sights. Glad to say that the flora and fauna have so far been unharmed, but it is attracting, as we say, 200 tourists every day to the island, and those numbers now restricted.
Stunning pictures. Let's get the weather. Here's Joe Farrer.
Hello. We've had a bit of a cool morning across the United Kingdom, but there is some sunshine around. It's not feeling too bad. We've got some showers coming into the Western Isles across the Highlands of Scotland, and there'll be more showers around by lunchtime for Scotland. But the wet weather over